me start, yeah. I'm Malachy Browne, and
I'm Anjali Singhvi.
And we work at the New York Times. I work in a unit called Visual Investigations. Anji's.
And I work in the graphics department in the New York Times.
And so we often team up on stories. What are visual investigations? They're investigations of visual evidence. There's so much documentary evidence out there nowadays for us to delve into, collect, organize, analyze, and extract reporting from that evidence that might not immediately seem available. And I'm going to focus in this presentation, both of us, on the analysis of that material, less about the collection of it, because there are plenty of other sessions about that, and less about the verification of it, although verification is at the heart of what we do. So it's about, what might not be readily apparent, and how by, some low-tech analysis and forensic video analysis, like going frame by frame through something, to high-tech things like 3D reconstructions and audio forensics. And so, you can check out several of our stories at this URL, and they range from local stories like this one here on the bottom right-hand side. Oops, sorry. Which happened in the Bronx, which is a killing of a teenager in the Bronx in Manhattan, yeah. Sorry, north of Manhattan. The Bronx isn't in Manhattan. And that was going door to door, collecting CCTV footage and stitching together how that fellow was killed, to identifying some of the suspects in the killing of Khashoggi, which was less visual investigation, but it's still online open source, and tracking people down. And then 3D reconstructions in Syria and Gaza, and exclusive footage. And as you'll have heard from many of the other people who are talking about pitching stories, what's distinctive about these is, like, they're generally pretty original angles or revelations about stories that are important, and they can have impact as well. Like even the story in the Bronx, we uncovered video evidence that detectives in New York hadn't found and used in their case against to convict the murderers of that person. The first one I'm going to talk about is the chemical weapons attack in Syria about a year and a half ago. Through this, we exchanged notes with Bellingcat, who many of you will be familiar with, and we worked and partnered with Forensic Architecture to do a 3D reconstruction of it. And so this was a very difficult one in that it was highly contested by Russia and Syria, who retook that area. Communications were down. It was part of the end of a military campaign where lots of media activists who you rely on for visual evidence had already been shipped out. Communications were down, or were very spotty from Duma on the day that it happened. And so in the early days, there was very limited videos coming through. We did this as a video and an augmented reality experience, which Anjali will talk about later on. I'm going to show maybe the first minute of the video soon, but I'll just go through some of the reporting steps. The ultimate question here is who carried this out? And so when you're starting there, well, what are the other questions you want to ask yourself and verify? Where did it happen? When did it happen? How did it happen? And why did it happen in that place? And so visually, how can we examine all of that and collect the evidence and put it into those buckets? And so the starting point was actually some video clips that came through on WhatsApp that day. We were already investigating another attack in Duma, so we had good sources there. But part of it was the satellite imagery, and it became very clear that this particular street was attacked in a 24-hour period and was absolutely leveled. And so the question was, well, why? And so talking to sources, and this was later confirmed by a UN report that was redacted, actually, this part of it was redacted. That street was an ambulance run to the last functioning hospital in Duma. And at the end of that street, you can't see it because it's blurred out here, there's no obvious hospital. But we knew across the street that there was an underground hospital here, and so we were like, well, where do the ambulances go? And one person told us, well, there's a tunnel at the end of the street. And so again, we asked multiple sources, are there tunnels into the hospital? And if so, could you tell us where? And send us a pin on WhatsApp. And so sources came back and 6 different sources said there's a tunnel there. Using archive, historical satellite imagery, you can actually see people digging the tunnel out there. So it's verifying, using visuals to verify what people are telling us. And the fact that that street was attacked and was, deliberately, very deliberately attacked was important, because that H-shaped building that you see here is the site of the chemical attack. And so it would be a coincidence that an attack would be staged at the very same place that the regime was attacking on that day. The regime story, by the way, was that this was all theatre, this was entirely staged, or that it happened, that it was set up afterwards to make it look like there was a chemical attack. How do I do this? Oh yeah, just tap. Cool. So, part of what we also tried to do with this is be transparent with the evidence. And so on the right-hand side, you're seeing a video that was filmed from that balcony. So you can imagine, the person filming it and then panning across the city to show the buildings in the distance. And, this is us just kind of calling out those details and showing the verification. I'm going to talk about this.
Yeah, so we weren't able to visit the site, but we used Russian news footage and witness accounts to reconstruct the scene in 3D. And this is a view of the balcony where the bomb was found. We started with asking questions like how many building floors there are, where's the main access, where's the stairwell, and other details. So we used Google Earth images to find out the scale and the dimensions of the building and the balcony. And we also used we constructed the interior layout of the building by using spatial markers for stairwells, for windows, and such details as seen in dozens of video footage. We tried to map out every victim that we saw from the in the video footage and map them as exactly where they were inside the building. We found at least 17 victims inside the building, as seen in this view.
Yeah, the split screen that you saw there, sketching out the architectural details. Ideally, what we were looking for was a camera person who filmed from the building, from the outside of the building, where sources had told us that it happened, through where all the victims were and right up to the bomb. So you had one continuous piece of footage connecting it all together. We didn't have that because all we were getting initially was like 5-second clips, 6-second clips. And so these were horrific videos, and Anjali and Barbara on our team, had the unenviable task of going through that and sketching out those details and really mapping the building together. So it was an important part of reporting in it. Bellingcat did some of that work as well, and they also helped on some of this. So in between, as Anjali was saying, there were some media activists filmed the balcony, but the main source of material was the Russian state media that went in and filmed the balcony as well and presented their own version of events. And in between shoots, they rolled the bomb over, and sorry, is that thing? What's happening with that? Oh, okay. Yeah, it's pretty. Yeah, I keep it. It's better like that, I think. Yeah. So anyway, those images were great evidence. They unwittingly kind of gave us all of this evidence for us to work with. They rolled the bomb over in between takes as well, which also gave us a sort of like a 360 images of the bomb, the canister itself. And by getting the specifications of it, Forensic Architecture, who partnered with us on this, did what they call a projection mapping technique. So we have the specifications of the bomb over here, and then projecting those stitched images onto it. You can almost imagine putting a digital glove on and going into that model and like turning the bomb over to reveal different details that are on it, examine the dents on it, and all of that sort of stuff. So it was quite useful. This is, Forensic Architecture's model, where you can see the camera positions for all of the different images. You can click into those and see what it looked like. But it allowed us to recreate the balcony and examine the debris as it related to the canister as well. Elliot Higgins is one of the first to point this out, that this was a a rigging that had been seen before. It looks like just tangled sort of metal, but there are actually some clues in there. There are wheels over here, there's a bucket here, there's a fin over here, and in the model, when you extract it out, it turns into a rigging that we had seen before. And this is important because it means that this thing was designed to fall from the sky. And we had seen that in previous attacks. In fact, this was another one that dropped in Douma on that particular day. So you can see the wheels are so it can be wheeled out of a helicopter. These things make sure that there's a bit of drag, and so the nose of the thing falls down. And so instead of tumbling, it hits nose first and will detonate. And then by rolling the bomb over in our model, we saw the scarring on the underside of it as well. And so by measuring the dimensions of that and the pattern of it, even like it's fainter here and heavier here, it matched perfectly the dimensions of this mesh that was also on the roof that was found beside it. And so the only explanation for that being seared right onto the bomb was that it hit it at great force. So, the evidence is suggesting that not only is it designed to fall from the sky, but it actually did fall from the sky. And there were dents and indentations at the nose of it as well. This, again, originally I thought we were looking at moonlight through the hole, moonlight reflected in the clouds through the hole in the roof. This was filmed by the first person into the building, and as they started coughing, they just their camera panned really quickly across the ceiling, and it was just a few frames that caught this thing. But by color correcting it, you're actually able to see, well, it's the weapon actually sitting in the hole that was punched in the roof itself. And it's in the exact same position as the weapon when it was photographed a couple of days later. Well, why is it white, and why is the weapon yellow when it was filmed the following day? I didn't know this. Again, we were talking over and back with Bellingcat about this. But we contacted the Chlorine Institute, and they sent us videos and studies and all sorts of stuff that measures what they call auto-refrigeration. So liquid chlorine, when it's inside in these pressurized canisters, once it goes below the level of the hole, which was the nozzle at this point, the liquid chlorine goes to it doesn't freeze, but it goes to minus 29 degrees Fahrenheit, which is very cold. It's so cold that it freezes the moisture in the air around it onto the weapon itself. And we had seen that behavior as well in a previous attack. So that answers another very fundamental journalistic question for us: if we can track down who filmed that and get the file from them. When did this happen? So did it happen on the night when all the witnesses are telling us it happened, or was it staged and set up? Well, this tells me that A, it's an active bomb, because auto-refrigeration happens only under those circumstances. And B, we tracked down the person who filmed that and got the metadata, and that gave us an approximate time of the attack, which was consistent with what witnesses were telling us from Douma. We also, probably the most revealing was now we've verified that the victims are in the building of an active chlorine attack. What do their symptoms show? And we spoke to 5 other experts in chemical weapons pathology who analysed that for us. I'm just going to play sort of the first minute of it, what we call the introduction, basically, the nut graph of the story.
The UN has accused the Assad regime of repeatedly committing war crimes in Syria, including a chemical attack in April on a town called Douma. It killed dozens of people and triggered US-led strikes inside Syria. To this day, Syrian officials and their Russian allies deny the attack ever took place.
There were no dead bodies found.
This is a theater.
هو عبارة عن سينما هوليوودية.
The event did not take place.
So it's a farce.
Finding out what really happened matters. Entire families were killed, and the regime went to great lengths to conceal the evidence. Our investigation is the most detailed reconstruction of the attack so far. We analysed a trove of videos and interviewed dozens of witnesses and experts. We scoured some evidence with the investigative group Bellingcat, and we teamed up with the agency Forensic Architecture to create a virtual model of the crime scene. We centre on one building that confirms where the attack happened, one bomb that shows who carried it out and when, and the victims, whose symptoms tell us what happened, a lethal chemical attack The evidence combined exposes Syria and Russia's lies.
Where's your concrete evidence about what happened?
The concrete evidence is right here. First, it's important to understand why Douma was a target that day. The Syrian military had launched a brutal campaign to retake the eastern suburbs of Damascus, held by rebels for 5 years.
Anyway, so it's on YouTube if you want to watch the full thing. But,
So since most of our evidence was spatial, we wanted to give our readers a chance to examine the evidence and the bomb for themselves in 3D. So you can basically, you can place the crime scene in space with your phone, and you can go around it and examine the evidence and where the bomb was placed and how it was placed in relation to the balcony. So this was an augmented reality. So this was an augmented reality experience that we created, and this is how our video investigation looked in print.
okay. So again, this is killing of a medic in Gaza last year, Razan al-Najjar, on June 1st, and our team had met her and interviewed her a couple of weeks before she was killed. And so we started investigating what happened in that instance. You know, it was a shocking killing. So again, just going through the process. Happy to answer any questions about the story and all the rest of it afterwards. You know, same as ever, collect as much visual evidence as possible. Because of our reporting there, we had sources, and they started sending us videos on the day that it happened. It was important to capture the metadata as we went along as well, so we're always trying to get the footage from the original sources to the extent that we can. You know, we talked to photographers who were out there, wire photographers and others, and also got their entire cards complete with the metadata. And it was important to do that so that we could organize all of the footage. We weren't there on June 1st ourselves, but we really wanted to understand what were the points of tension, the points of inflection, the escalation that led to live fire being used on that day, so that we could put ourselves there. And almost every minute was covered, you know, of the hours leading up to her shot. And in fact, the moment of her killing, 6 cameras were rolling at that moment in time. We collected 1,300 pictures and videos from the original devices of the people who filmed them by going to Gaza and collecting all of that footage. And we strung it out and organized it and put in notes and all the rest of it. And we strung it out as a video sequence and realized, you know, I might see a scene and then 20 minutes later I'd see the same scene from a different angle. And then we realized, the clock settings are off. So we had to find out which clock settings were off, go back to those original people, get them to photograph a real clock and not change their settings, and then calculate what the difference was and reorganize the videos again so that we had accurately minute by minute. And that proved really important, because when we interviewed the IDF and got the minutes of every shot they took and their justification for every shot, we were able to analyze what was going on the ground. So in addition to doing that, you know, once you collect the footage, you know, I mean, this part of it isn't scientific, but it's literally just going frame by frame through it and calling out details in the blurry chaos of the whole thing. And ultimately, what we're trying to do is, can we freeze that moment in time and examine it in space? And so that was our challenge. We didn't know whether we were going to be able to do it, but just this is the process. So that's Rami. That single bullet hit him in the thigh, just above his knee. You can see him holding his leg with his white glove there. This is Mohammed. He was sprayed by the shrapnel from the bullet, and he's lying on the ground. And in fact, the shell of the bullet hit his torso, pierced his top, and we have a photograph of that. And again, just verifying that Rami was indeed, this is a picture from the ambulance when he was taken away, that he was indeed injured. A lot of the medics were wearing this pink stripe across their vest. There's not much other pink in the field in Gaza on that day, so just like we saturated the contrast, or changed the contrast, we oversaturated for pink in some of the footage at the critical moments to call out where those medics were. And so again, this is a like chaotic, blurry scene, but the pink, we thought this was Razan, but the pink showed that there was a medic in there. And in moments beforehand, this is her friend Lamia, and in one of the other videos we saw them holding hands as they were actually leaving the protest area because they felt that it was getting a bit dicey. And this is her just a split second after she was shot, caught in between these other protesters. Lamia is looking back. She called out when she was hit, and Lamia is turning back. We sat down with Lamia, and as we were showing her this footage, she spontaneously just said, "Hi, that's Razan there," and she stopped us in our tracks. So that was part of the process here. So again, we teamed up with Forensic Architecture again on this, but we were doing something similar to this. It's like freezing the critical moment and other moments so that we could examine it from multiple different angles, what was going on, where people fell, and later on plot that out. Again, this is Cinema 4D. So this is one of over here to the right-hand side is where the injured people were. The fence is over here and the snipers are over here. And we wanted to examine, what was going on leading up to that. Was there, in the space between the medics and the fence? So this is some of our original stuff. We also sent drones out, high-definition drones, to drone the entire area. And this was the experimental part. Could we make a 3D model of it and put those cameras into that space? And the footage was so HD that we captured accurately the tufts of grass, which are important. I'll show you in a minute. Because that was after the event, we used the footage that we had to sketch in the details, like the position of the snipers, the trucks, the bunker, the sand berms where they were firing from. You can see they're positioned here pretty much level to the ground. This is what it looks like in Blender, which is an open source software which you can use to do 3D modeling and that. And just like Duma, here's one of the cameras, and just to give you a sense of what that looks like. So within that model, this is the early stages of it, obviously. Within that model, we're taking, the pattern of the grass in the background of the videos to accurately place place those videos into the model. And trace the path of those cameras through the model. And so you end up with something like this from lots of different angles at the critical moment. That's just when the shot went off. And so the bullet went right through sort of a group of medics, a cluster of medics that were lying on the ground. If I just play that again. You can see them flinching. So this is Mohammed on the ground, and that's Rami just as he was hit, and Razan is back behind. And so this is what it looks like as we start sketching it out and modeling it. And because that single bullet hit 2 people, and we have their exact positions in the model, we're able to sketch back where the bullet came from. And this is where the snipers took up position a few minutes earlier, and you can actually see them pointing in that direction. And so there's no question the bullet came from there. The question is, though, is how did it hit his knee and hit her in the heart? Because it's a rising bullet and they're firing, almost parallel to the ground. And we noticed in the footage that these 2 guys are pointing at the ground. And also from our interviews from Mohammed and Shafi, they were kind of saying it's almost like the bullet exploded from the ground in front of us. And you also saw in this video a puff of dust rising up and going across the screen. And so we also asked the IDF, who were you aiming at in that moment in time? And they said that they were aiming at somebody who was wearing a yellow shirt and that they hit him. And the only person near the path of the bullet wearing a yellow shirt is this guy here. And so our theory was that the bullet missed that target because they were aiming for the ankles, hit the ground, skimmed back up and hit his knee and continued on, separated because the casing of the bullet came off and hit her heart. And we had photographs of her operation and post-mortem and all the rest of it, and you could see the lead fragments inside in her chest. And talked to ballistic experts and snipers, and they said, yeah, we've seen that happen loads of times in our own trainings, that if you're firing that particular bullet with that particular weapon, we knew all of that detail as well. At that sort of angle, if it hit concrete like this, it would skim at a low angle, but if it hits the earth, it would actually the bullet would push a ramp in front of it and then shoot back out of the ground. So we had all of that sort of testimony to support the theory again. So anyway, that was sort of what we were doing. But also, aside from the forensics, it's involved like the interviews with the doctors. Like we interviewed 60 different people as well, the autopsy records, all the rest of it. So what you would sit down with the medics who were there, witnesses who we see in the footage, which is a very strange experience because you're analysing it and they don't know who the hell you are, but like their actions on that day intimately. So all of that sort of stuff. I can answer questions afterwards if you want. Very quickly, I'll go through Khashoggi, and Anjali will go through something we did on the Brazil dam collapse. So, killing of Jamal Khashoggi. At the start, we just had this footage of him going in, as everybody else had, and anybody who covered that story will remember the Turkish authorities drip-fed leaks for weeks, on what happened here. And so we were working with this, and Anjali, do you want to talk about this?
So we looked at this aerial image of the Saudi consulate and tried to place the events of what happened when, as Malachy said, we only had this one video footage, and so you could identify the entrance in this footage and place it in the aerial image, and then.
Yeah, and then the Turkish authorities published the names and grainy photographs of 15 men that they said were suspects. So again, the obvious question is, who are these guys? Are they members? Are they in the Saudi government? Are they Saudi officials? And do they have ties to the Crown Prince? Because we knew that he was a target of the Crown Prince, who had threatened to put a bullet in him a year beforehand. And so the Saudi Twitter sphere went into overdrive that night, and we were collecting a lot of that information and trying to verify it. A lot of it was wrong, some of it was right as well. Somebody posted this list of diplomats from London, and he's listed on there, and through one of our reporters who has diplomatic connections in London, we were able to verify that. We went around and collected other photographs of, I'm focusing on one guy, Maher Mutreb, who kind of was the leader of the operation, really. And we found people who used to hang out with him in London and did the usual, is this the guy? He's got a fairly distinctive face. And then we went back and looked through file footage of trips that the Crown Prince had taken and who's there beside him every step of the way but Mutreb. But Mutreb, this was a visual reference. There is a possibility that he has a twin brother as well who also travels with the Crown Prince. So we wanted a textual reference for this, either a flight manifest, him appear, because they toured all over the States and Europe. Could a police source give us a list of the Saudis who were traveling, or was there a hotel booking? And so this was, we worked with a lot of the internal reporters in the Times who were hitting up their, hotel unions and police sources, and national security sources, and we eventually got the goods that he was there at that time. So we were happy to name him. And what's next?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and do the same for several of the other suspects as well.
Just want to quickly add. So we did this visual treatment on these images to call out Maher Mutreb and the Crown Prince, so it's easier to see what's going on.
And we did a quick hit story, then a visual interactive with as much of the evidence as we had, including flight logs with Anjali, and then about a week later, a print piece naming 9 of the 15 of them as Saudi officials, I think, was the first pass, and then a few weeks later we did the video. So it was a video, yeah.
A private jet flying from Riyadh lands around 3:30 a.m.
So this is just kind of a segment halfway through the video. Again, you can watch it in.
That plane is often used by the Saudi government, and it's carrying 9 Saudi officials, some who play key roles in Khashoggi's death. We'll get to Team 3 later on, and for now, focus on these men from Team 2. This is Salah Al-Tubeji, a high-ranking forensics and autopsy expert in the Saudi Interior Ministry. Turkish officials will later say his role was to dismember Khashoggi's body. Another is Mustafa Al-Madani, a 57-year-old engineer. As we'll see, it's no accident that he looks like Khashoggi. And this is Maher Mutreb, the leader of the operation. Our investigation into his past reveals a direct link between Mutreb and the Saudi Crown Prince. When bin Salman toured a Houston neighborhood earlier this year, we discovered that Mutreb was with him, a glowering figure in the background. We found him again in Boston, at a UN meeting in New York, in Madrid, and Paris too. This global tour was all part of a charm offensive by the prince to paint himself as a moderate reformer. Back then, Mutreb was in the Royal Guard. Now he would orchestrate Khashoggi's killing. And his close ties to the Crown Prince begged the question, just how high up the Saudi chain of command did the plot to kill go? Early Tuesday morning, Khashoggi flies back.
So the storytelling technique here was like breaking it down, the evidence in the hours leading up to the killing. And the idea here was that, you know, the Saudi explanation was, first, he's alive and well, we have no concerns for his welfare. Then that changed to, oh yeah, maybe he's disappeared. Then a rogue agent and we know nothing about it. And so the idea that this thing wasn't a premeditated hit job, just like, we just wanted to collect all of the evidence and just put it together and just show how it came together, like, really tightly. I know there was lots of other great reporting by CNN, Post, and many others as well about it. And what was interesting actually was that as one organization would publish details, that kind of confirmed other details that other organizations were sitting on. And so there was this snowball effect. And I remember when we published the first story about Mutreb, the next day, the Turkish authorities put out way more footage of him walking into the building and walking around the place, and so it just confirmed, you know, what everybody suspected. And the UN report, if anybody hasn't read the UN report and is interested in this, I mean, that goes into really specific detail where you actually have 12 minutes before Khashoggi arrives, Mutreb and the Saw doctor talking about like how they're going to kill him and will his bodies fit in the bag, is the bag strong enough to hold the weight of his torso, and all of that sort of stuff. And the doctor's worried, he's like, my boss doesn't know I'm on this job, am I going to be okay, you know, and all of that sort of stuff. So
yeah, this is just like a little bit about the process. We created a 3D model of the consulate, and we created this visual timeline placing all the events leading up to Mr. Khashoggi's disappearance. So here you can see, like, at 9:55, Mutreb is seen entering, and Tubegi then enters. So this basically really helped us place all the events, because there were so many different things going on in and around the consulate. Here you can see Mr. Khashoggi last seen entering the consulate. It just gave us a sense of what was going on in the 3D space by spatializing these events. Here you can see, like in the photo, small details such as windows from the interior photos. You can basically place them where they may be in the 3D, and then.
can I just say that video there is the ambassador saying, look, there's nothing to see here.
Yeah, it's the Consul General giving a tour. So some of our reporters in the Bureau were able to get some information about the interior layout of the consulate. So we recreated what the Consul General's office might look like using photos and interviews and other information. Basically, that was where Mr. Khashoggi was taken up to. He was brought up to there and was last seen. Can we go through that?
I might skip through this really quickly, but I can come back to it if you want. But this is, you know, just this summer in Hong Kong. Again, you know, a trove of visual evidence, and just, it's really chaotic and blurry, but breaking down the details, like police slamming, you know, protesters who are already on the ground with their shields, calling out their different ranks, you know, finding people, and, you know, if they were comfortable with us naming them and running interviews with them about what happened, and using the visuals to show what happened to them. And then, you know, using a split screen with with graphics to show, you know, the misuse of tear gas, not to scatter a protest, but actually to compress it into a confined space, which is really dangerous because it can cause stampedes. And so just doing a sort of a TikTok of how they did this. So you can see the crowd being forced by tear gas into an even smaller area as it goes, and eventually into that building, which also filled with tear gas. But Angeli's going to...
I'll go through this quickly. So for this investigation, we looked at this Brazil mining dam collapsed in Brumadinho in Brazil. Yeah, thanks. So we had satellite images that showed what the dam looked like before the collapse and after the collapse, and it was really striking, the mud flow. And this is an image from Digital Globe that captured the entire flow of the mud, and you can see we were able to see that it traveled for at least 5 miles before it finally stopped, and it buried more than 150 people in toxic mud. So we were able to find a student's thesis who had focused on this dam, who had talked about how the dam structure was built, and so we were able to translate that information to a simple visual and basically show areas where the dam was really vulnerable. And we analyzed the video footage, the security camera footage of the dam, and basically you can see these 3 places where the dam first started to collapse, and then the mud after that liquefied. So this is a video showing the liquefaction of the mud as soon as the face of the dam collapsed. And we found another report that the owner of the company, Wale, who owns the dam, had hired to do a report on. They had mentioned that the dam was prone to liquefaction. This was a year before it collapsed. And so we wanted to give our readers a sense of, because we wanted to show them in close detail what this 5-mile stretch really looked like. So for the web, we produced this interactive piece where you could basically slowly go through the entire stretch, and you can see the buildings, cafeteria, where there people just very quickly swept through the mud, and other details.
Can I ask where are the satellite images from?
I'm sorry?
Where are the satellite images from?
Digital globe.
Okay.
Yeah. So as part of our reporting, we also wanted to investigate if there are any other dams that are also prone to this kind of failure. So we looked at other similar dam constructions and if there were around any populated areas. We found more than 20 similar dams that were very near or uphill from the populated areas that would be at risk if they failed. And we combined different visual techniques, spatial analysis, satellite imagery, photos and illustrations to produce this investigation. That's it.
I see only one person asleep. Still asleep. Any questions? Yeah.
Can you explain, like, when did your visual investigation, how did that idea come about that you should have a visual investigation team? And people who work on it, what kind of expertise, what prior expertise do you have?
Yeah. Okay. So the question is how did this come about? The idea about why we should do it and what kind of expertise is on the team. The idea. I've been working in this sort of area for a few years with Storyful and with a startup that's no longer around called Reportedly, and so you know. On both of those organizations, we had different attempts at doing sort of visual investigations, so kind of knew that the possibility was there. And we just said we'd try it out. Basically, we kind of wrote a strategy about how we could do this and combine deeper analysis of available imagery to try to find more reporting and basically investigate news stories. In fact, the day after we wrote that strategy, the Khan Shaykhun attack in Syria happened, and so that was our first ever piece where we just said, okay, we'll go at it, and that was about 3 weeks, and it was just 3 of us, and so it was our first attempt. But about a month later then, there was President Erdogan's security men beat up protesters and sent 12 people to hospital in DC, and that was a different type of a one. It wasn't a linear video, it was more of an interactive with clips, writing to the clips. And so they were our first 2, and it became apparent that we should be doing this just way more often. And so we started to hire around that, because it's hard to train folks in open source, if they don't come from if they're not doing it already. And so we started to hire some people who have open source skill, online open source, OSINT. So the type of stuff that you saw from Henk van Es and Paul Myers and Andrea's talk on using UGC in documentary making, and people from that type of community. And in fact, yeah, Barbara Marcolini was our first hire, and she's Brazilian. who was doing a master's in video journalism, but also working part-time in Storyful on her days off. And she was first in, and Christoph Kettel, who's an Austrian satellite imagery expert, and he was with Amnesty. So non-traditional background, and we've kind of developed since then. But also, so we've got a team now of basically open source reporters, graphics reporters like Anjali, and then we've got video editors and motion graphics who kind of help produce those stories as well as exec editors. Now we're 6. We were 3 until March, and now we're 6.
And just how many work hours did you put, for example, say in the Palestine project? And did you ever have to account that to your boss, or they just say, sounds good, go ahead?
No, that was a big project, and it was mandated basically to investigate it. But so it was a collaboration between video and the international desk mainly, and our Jerusalem bureau and Gaza reporters as well. So it was a big effort, and it was a long one. Yeah, it was. I mean, months. Yeah. So
There's some that can just take a few weeks, and others take months.
some can be done, and some we do day turns as well, like regularly as well. So yeah. All of these principles apply to breaking news as well, you know, and visualizing breaking news.
I have 2 questions. First, how do you sort of pick which stories you want to investigate, and how much work do you do before you make that decision?
Yeah.
And the other question is, do you think this is something that could also be done in smaller newsrooms, or do you sort of need a lot of resources to do it?
Yeah, I mean, it's the same as any process. I mean, develop the idea, and commission the idea is the process. First of all, like, I think the best starting point is there an abundance of visual evidence to work with? Is, you know, your approach or your story going to be an original take on that story? Is it going to move the story forward? You know, what are the revelations going to be? The further you get away from an event, those revelations need to be higher, you know, bigger, and what's the impact of the story going to be as well? So they're all of the things that we would weigh up when we're making a decision on it, because there's any number of stories that we could go after. And yeah, so does that answer the question? Yeah, and like an example, like one of the stories that we did, you know, in the middle of, you know, a couple of other bigger ones, is that there was a shooting of lots of protesters in unarmed in Nigeria, in Abuja, last October. And on Twitter, of course, there were lots of video clips, but they were chaotic. They were from different days. They were mischaracterized and contextualized. So we just started talking to sources over a weekend, and got lots of pictures and videos over the weekend that we were able to verify. And so just decided let's go for it, and, you know, sent folks into Abuja who made contact with the community and gathered a lot of other evidence from phone footage, but also interviewed victims in hospitals, and, you know, you do what you do. But that was probably like about a 4 to 5 week piece. So we collected as much as we could earlier on, and then it's about, you know, sort of doing, surrounding that with additional reporting and then producing the piece.
In terms of resources, there are many open source tools that we use, especially for 3D reconstruction. Blender is a really great tool, and there are also a lot of mapping tools that are free and open source, so we use a lot of those.
And can small newsrooms do it? Yeah, I mean, like, you know, you can partner with, you know, expert groups that are out there on certain projects, but if you've got somebody in your newsroom who's adept at this type of sleuthing, then yeah, absolutely you can. And, you know, obviously the production lift for a linear video is much higher than a written story or something that's like a visual interactive where you're speaking to visuals, writing directly to visuals. And so that might be a better starting point for a smaller newsroom. But it can be, you know, often with these pieces, it's like organizing the evidence in time and space, try to understand like where and when events went down. And so even something as simple as, you know, when the police released CCTV of the Skripal murderers in Salisbury, the Skripal suspects, I should say, in Salisbury, you know, just they had all the videos had timestamps, but they hadn't geolocated where those videos were taken. So by going around Google Street View in Salisbury and identifying where each piece of CCTV was taken at the time it was taken, you're able to see, well, were they really in Salisbury doing, you know, as tourists to see the lovely cathedral there, or did they walk straight from the train station towards his house? And so you could do that very simply and reconstruct it in a day, you know. So it's just kind of diving into the details that are there.
You seem to be working much faster than the police and justice. So are you becoming a source of inspiration or a source in itself for the cops and for justice? I
mean, we don't share our reporting with them. Like, often what we'll do with these pieces is we'll do Twitter threads or blog posts if there's certain new skills or innovations in the stories. And also if we've got, you know, as with any investigation, there's so much extra reporting that doesn't make it into the final piece. So we'll put that out into the public domain. But yeah, authorities have got in touch with us and said, hey, can you share your evidence on this? And we don't do that. Yeah. It's online. It's online. They can look at it online. Yeah, yeah. We just met somebody from the UN who said that the Gaza one informed their report into what happened in Gaza, and the one from the Bronx was particularly sort of pleasing because we uncovered evidence that they hadn't seen before. Yeah, but that was just literally by going around and collecting security footage. Question here. There's one here and there's one in there. Yeah.
How do you jump language barriers? Arabic, Russian, Portuguese? How do you do it if you have data that's not clean, it's in Arabic? What are the tools you're using?
Humans. We're lucky enough to have a good number of languages in the newsroom. Or we'll hire translators in as well. But I Google Translate, obviously, as well, you know, or Bing Translate if the language isn't right. But yeah, we're very fortunate. I mean, there's big IT department at the Times, and even for the Sri Lanka one, we were grappling with Tamil, which doesn't very easily translate in Google, as you can imagine. But just by looking at the directory inside, because people log the languages that they have, we found 3 Tamil speakers in the building who came down and were translating stuff for us, and so yeah, we're lucky. We're fortunate in that respect, but freelance translators. That's it. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just wondering, a lot of these very impressive sort of visual investigations, you received video material and other material from sources. So I was just generally wondering, like, how doable are these types of investigations, do you think, without the access to that kind of source material? Can just sort of do it on your own using satellite imagery and other tools?
I would say majority of it you can just do with data from open source. Like, that's also like, we start collecting all this data from, first step is to collect whatever is available open source, and then we dig deep into, you know, what more can we report out and find. But there's a lot of data available. Satellite imagery has become like a huge source for investigations these days. There's so much you can do, so much analysis that you can do to uncover things in satellite images and radar imagery and stuff. So I would say a lot of it you could.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of tools out there to help as well, and there's loads of case studies for people to learn the practices behind it. Yeah. Yeah, but it takes time is the main thing, and so, you know, the most important thing is for an editor to just free up a reporter if an idea shows promise, to go and develop that and then decide whether you're gonna go for it. Yeah. Yep.
Can you tell us about stories that you have tried to do and decided not to continue or just dropped it?
Yeah.
Trying to think.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a few. Yeah, I mean, like, there was one that came to us about, you know, an ISIS affiliate that might be setting up in the DR Congo last year, and between competing stories, we decided not to do that. We get pitches from time to time from people, and whether there's, again, does it meet all of the categories that we have? Yeah, we started looking into the violence in Sudan, but we knew BBC Africa Eye were probably going to do that as well, and they did a terrific job on 2 stories there as well. So kind of understanding the landscape a little bit as well, probably.
I think we had a story, we were looking into the Ethiopian flight crash and how that happened, and we were waiting for the precise altitude data for a really long time, but it was never made public. So we only had a few locations, so we weren't able to actually recreate how it went down. So that was also
the airstrike on the Saudi refinery recently. You know, what could we tell from the visual evidence that was presented there, which was very limited, and so there wasn't really much to say about it, except that the evidence itself isn't a justification to assign blame or declare war. So I think we did a print piece about that, which was a day turn, that it was pretty inconclusive. But it was, yeah, you know. So often you'll get, figure out that problem and answer that question, but sometimes it's just not possible to, and therefore, you're making more of a meal. Also, lots of that stuff is government handouts, which is, so you need to find independent footage as well, or evidence. Yeah. Anything else down the back there?
Could you maybe tell us a bit about what your process looks like for collecting open source data and archiving it? Like, do you, in cases like where social media companies might remove content that is crucial to the investigation, like how do you do that?
We use a tool, a paid-for tool called SAMDESK, S-A-M-D-E-S-K, which is great for monitoring as well as gathering, as soon as, the closer you can start collecting the evidence to the incident, the better, because as everybody knows, it's copy and pasted and scraped and recontextualized. So the closer you can start gathering that footage, the better. Sometimes it is, trying to move people who have filmed something, who may have more footage on a cell phone that you find on Twitter or Facebook or wherever, into a secure channel to try to talk to them there. That's encrypted. SAMDESK. What else do we use? I mean, a lot of this tools and search techniques that you would have learned from other presenters this morning. There's no magic one-stop shop that you can go to. We work with Storyful as well. So if we say, look, we know that a missile exploded over Riyadh around this time, like last night, can you go and find every reference to all of these street names or whatever, or investigate it for us, and they'll come back with a sort of a hit list that we'll run through and verify. So sometimes it's working with them. So they're a news provider, a service provider to us as well. It's a mix of all those different things, but our team is pretty good at uncovering that kind of stuff anyway, and just kind of sleuthing around, searching. Yeah. And then we start to organize it then and to take it down. So we have a file management system and a naming convention for all of that. And so for me, having the YYMMDD up at the top is really important, especially because we often want to reorganize footage, and then like who the source of the footage was, and a bit of context on it. And we, same as any sort of organization that does video, will have a server with a system and a folder structure that we log all of our files into and keep it organized. Yeah. Yeah.
I have a question here. I have a mic. So there's how often do you use CCTV footage, and how difficult is it to get it? And do you have any tips on how to get CCTV? Like you had the one about the mine. So, for example, where did you get that? And if you have any tips on getting it, because many of it is from private places, and some obviously is from police. But so any tips on that?
Yeah, For the mine, this footage was already published, so we were able to get it because of that. But I think there are a lot of other footage, security footage that sometimes we also pay for, I think. And but usually a lot of this stuff is published. Will be published already if it's a big story.
But typically there's a lot more that isn't published. It depends on the circumstances. If it's an airport, like usually you'll have, I remember attacks on airports, that usually a staff member will record it and share it with their friends, and then somebody will put it out into the open. And so tracking the provenance is quite difficult in those instances where it's a recording of a recording. If it's something that happens in the street or something like that, or in a private environment, get there as quickly as you possibly can to gather it, because even with the one in the Bronx, like some CCTV systems will re-record 24 hours. Most of them will be 5 days a week or 2 weeks. Sometimes it's a month, but it depends business to business. And a lot of them had overwritten it or what have you, or otherwise deleted it or lost it. I remember another story we did about an attack in Manhattan, and the police had gone to all of the businesses in that case, so the businesses were not willing to provide it to us. I think the police had prepped them. FOIing footage, which can be quite difficult, like if it's police body cam footage and stuff like that, that can be an avenue to try to get it, and keep pushing for it. Again, Forensic Architecture did a piece. They teamed up with a investigative journalism group in Chicago about a police shooting, and it took them 13 months to get the footage, but they just kept pressing and challenging the rejections of their FOIAs, from what I understand. So there's that kind of stuff. But it can be really valuable. Bellingcat did a piece about the murder of a journalist in, somebody will prompt me and remember the name of it, but Timmy Allen did a great job. From the frames of CCTV, the light reflected off a car's number plate differently. It was really blurry, but by taking those frames, he was able to decode what the number plate was and find it. Yes, indeed. Yeah, Killing Pavel. That's it. It's a great piece.
Hi. Have you ever seen like fake footage or fake photos? And for example, in the case of Syria, I mean, obviously, Assad regime and Russia as well, they like proclaim the different version and they try to prove it as well somehow. So how do you deal with that?
So the Syria story was a really difficult one, and in fact, a couple of weeks into it, we didn't know what we had. We were trying to get satellite imagery to prove that those holes in those roofs where those bombs landed were new, and from comparing one day to the next. But like, no matter what image we got from what angle, we just couldn't see it for a variety of different reasons. That's a legal limitation on the provision of satellite imagery, actually. It's not a technological one, because governments have far better satellite imagery, which, by the way, is just ridiculous because it's for protection of privacy. But Google Street View is allowed, and there's solutions to blur, if anybody wants to write a story about that. But so we were trying to prove that through that way in terms of the timing of it, but we couldn't obviously do it that way. The Russian media that went there and filmed it, kind of like, they were presenting a particular version of events, but it really kind of helped us understand the crime scene much better, and gave us angles that we didn't have from the other kind of fragmented activist footage. And so we kind of almost turned it on its head once the evidence sort of presented itself. What was difficult about that story is that there were scenes that were filmed in the hospital of an alleged chemical attack, which seemed to be a little bit frantic and not actually a real attack. And I think one of the children that was filmed in that scene was then presented by the Syrian government as saying, look, this whole thing was staged. But there were several attacks that day, and it wasn't clear what one was. And so we really wanted to focus in on what happened at that one building where we know that lots of people were killed, and where lots of witnesses are telling us that an attack happened there. And by the way, like, most people in Douma that day were sheltering underground because of the intensity of the bombardment. So it's not like there were people out roaming the streets and what have you that could answer questions. But there were lots of people hiding in the tunnel to the hospital. And so it's really, you know, we interviewed a lot of people, around 30 people for that story as well. And so it wasn't just the visual evidence, but the visual evidence kind of cut through all of the noise of that and presented, you know, irrefutable facts for us. And so that's really what I'm trying to present here, is that, you know, it's what does the visual evidence, what side of a story can visual evidence present when there are competing explanations for an event. And yeah, so that was it, and it stood up. And for instance, we didn't find out about the tunnel until later on in the piece, and so a lot of our original interviews, people were saying, yeah, we smelled chlorine, and we were in the tunnel to the hospital, so we went deeper in towards the hospital. We didn't know where it was coming from, and we didn't know about the tunnel at that time. Chlorine, by the way, sinks down and will find the lowest place to go. And so we were like, maybe that was another attack. It wasn't until we were able to verify that there was a tunnel there. We connected our notes from the original start of the investigation to that point in the investigation. We're like, that's why. And so you're doing lots of that sort of cross corroboration as well. Anyway.
Have you ever had a situation where, excuse me, anybody ever doubted your visuals and accused you of making them up?
Yeah, on that story, you know, Syria is always a very difficult one, and yeah, you know, even on the Gaza story, we got a little bit of pushback as well from some sources. It was several months after the event, and again, it's a chaotic sort of situation, and people who are there misremember things, or, you know, memories can be melded as stories kind of circulate. And so again, as soon as you can get there and talk to witnesses or gather footage that is immediately after the event where people are giving testimony. I vividly remember one of the nurses by Rami's side in the hospital saying, yeah, Razan was also shot, but like hopefully she'll be okay, but she pointed to her back. I saw her pointing to her back and things like that. And so those immediate memories that you can capture to the extent possible, then that's what you want to look for, I think. Yeah, the Nigerian government, when we interviewed them about the attack in Nigeria, I mean, they denied it. They said it was an act of self-defense. It clearly wasn't. They subsequently were forced to launch an inquiry into it. Yeah, so you get that sort of blowback. And there's always folks on Twitter, you know.
You have mentioned strategy. Can you tell us a bit more about building a digital audience on that? Is that a success story, would you say? And is that more, do you get an international audience or rather an American audience?
Yeah, YouTube we obviously, like we're publishing on multiple different platforms on site, and the New York Times attracts a particular type of site who are not necessarily coming for video. But thankfully, we usually get good promotion on the homepage for that and through the social channels. And so, you know, we have a rollout document for every piece that we put out. YouTube, we're getting a majority international audience and a majority young audience, like I think 18 to 35 audience. We're getting really good engagement time there. And we're getting really good interaction on the community posts, and you know, our reporters put a concerted effort into answering comments and questions in there. So on Twitter as well, we'll put out Twitter threads, and we'll do Times Insiders, which are the blog posts explaining the reporting, you know, basically what I'm presenting here today. And so to that extent, we really want to cultivate the audience and kind of showcase this type of reporting and that kind of stuff, and answer questions that people have about it. So we'll often go in and out of YouTube. I was just going to say that actually in response to getting blowback. There's a community now that recognizes this as visual investigations out there, and so sometimes we find even the community that we've engaged with before will be going into comments and answering questions, and if there's like, you know, skepticism in there, you know, some commenters will come in and say, you know, you should really check out this piece. I mean, they do their homework and look, they're being transparent. And sometimes, what I love sometimes is on YouTube, you can actually comment about a particular moment in the video, and so people will have questions about that too. But we also, you know, say if it's an ongoing story like Khashoggi, if there's a new development in that story which warrants resurfacing the video, we will put a community post out there and just put a GIF in and say, look, this is the latest 1 or 2 lines, full story sort of here if you want to do more. And so that kind of drives engagement as well and keeps that story alive. But yeah, our audience has grown. You know, we didn't probably pay enough attention to YouTube in the last couple of years, but it's more than doubled in the last year, I think. Oh yeah. Any more questions? One over there. Sorry.
What are the copyrights and consent issues while working with the UGCs?
Yeah, I mean, making sure it doesn't put somebody at risk by publishing their material, finding out whether they want to be credited or not, or paid or not, you know, whether you decide you want to contact them or not even, you know. There might be a risk if you feel that somebody might be monitored. So they're the main issues, I think. Making sure that any freelance media people are paid. Yeah. Is that it? Okay, thank you very much. I think that's it.